It's episode 69. And we got a hot one coming in for you. And of course, as always, the AC Show podcast is brought to you by mortgage professional Rebecca Casey with DLC Origin Mortgages. She just helped us secure our first mortgage, which we never in a million years would have thought we would be able to get. So if you're in that position, or if you're an experienced home buyer, give Rebecca a shout. You can send her an email, rebecca@customcoastmortgages.com. This episode is also brought to you by the Russell Brewing Company. Located in Surrey, BC, they are about to open their new tasting room. They've been developing delicious craft beers since 1995. And if you would like to order some directly to your house or find the nearest liquor store that carries their products, just head to russellbeer.com. Today's guest is Miss Nicolle Hodges, author of the Orgasm book, Oh, the Places You'll Go. Oh. She is also the founder of Girls Who Say Fuck and the Men Who Take Baths project. It starts with a story about an orgasm that changed her life, and then we explore the world of ethical non-monogamous relationships. There's a lot in here, you guys. It's a very interesting episode. I hope you enjoy it. Share it with your friends. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. And follow Nicolle on Instagram at Nicolle. And yes, that means Nicolle is spelled with two L's.
With Andrew Christopher, your host. It's the Andrew Christopher Show. But really we call it the AC Show. Yeah, we really call it the AC Show. Really call it the AC Show. It's the AC Show. It's the AC Show with AC, your host. Check it out.
Welcome, Nicolle L. Hodges. I'm so stoked to have you on the show. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. I'm having a great day so far. And I hope by the time this comes out, I'm still having a great day.
Yes, I'm sure you will be. You seem to be the type that you don't let yourself have too many bad days. So I figured we would start just by passing over the mic, so to speak, to you. And you can let us know what led you, well, first of all, to become a journalist and a writer, and more specifically, what pulled you into the world of sex and psychedelics, most specifically?
Every time I get to somewhere in my life where I stop and I reflect about what brought me to this moment, such as your question, I always realize how far back the decisions were that were made to get me to here. And I struggle with this question sometimes because I'm like, how much of my life does someone need to know to understand the gravity of me being in this moment, having been a journalist and talking about sex and psychedelics? And I think I just have to go on instinct as to what memories kind of come up first for me. And one of the things that always comes to mind is this desire to seek out truth. But when I say truth, what I'm more so referring to is the dissonance between the life we want and the way we're told life is supposed to be. And so I grew up in a Christian town, and I remember going to church, and I decided to go on a missionary trip to Zambia in Africa. And we were going there to like spread the message of God. But I realized that it wasn't that I wasn't a Christian. That wasn't what came to mind first. It was that I questioned why I was only ever told that in order to be a good person, you had to believe in God and you had to follow that path. And so we had to stand up on the stage in front of the entire congregation and say why we were going on this missionary trip. And the mic was slowly coming down to me, and I realized, oh my God, this is the moment that I declare that I'm actually not a Christian. So everyone was coming down and saying, I'm going because I need to spread the word of God. I need to go, let these people know that there's another way. And it came to me, and I said, I want to go because I want to prove that you don't have to believe in God to be a good person. And I passed the mic, and everyone was silent.
Wow.
And I went on this trip, and I remember being told that, we were going to encounter really disenfranchised, unhappy people that were misguided and lost and needed our help. And what I saw was the complete opposite. I saw people who embodied what I always thought faith was supposed to be. And to me, faith wasn't putting yourself below something. It was meeting your higher self. Mm-hmm. And that was one of those moments, like a shatter moment that you have in your life, in your upbringing, where you realize that not everything that you've been told is true is actually the way. And so I knew that I wanted to be a journalist, but that was one of those many moments in my life that solidified it for me, that this was something that wasn't just going to be a career. It was going to be a lifestyle choice and something that I put into practice every day of my life.
Yeah, that's very cool. I can say that, my kind of spiritual awakening maybe is the right term, that it's only recently started happening, where I've started questioning kind of what more is out there to do with spirituality and life in general. Because I was raised in I guess Abbotsford's not a small town, but I was in Agassiz, so a small town, and raised in a Christian family, and it was kind of all I knew. All the way up till I was, at least 20, and probably through my 20s, I never really thought much about what else there was going on. And that's been something new in my life, that I've trying to expand my views of the world, and that's why I'm stoked to speak with experts like yourself in your areas of expertise. And so now, what did lead you into your areas of expertise?
I love that you say areas of expertise, because this is something I also am challenged by and challenge myself on a regular basis with, which is the idea of like, what makes an expert? Mm-hmm. And whenever I do these talks or run workshops, I always remind myself that I am the expert of my own experiences. So I think that's important, because going into these conversations, there are some things that I might say that somebody doesn't agree with. And I think that's perfectly normal and rational and good for growth. But these are my experiences, and those are what I'm an expert in. So that's the only place that I can speak from. And then I try to back that up with as many interviews with other people as possible to kind of challenge my views or corroborate what I think. So right. I think part of this exploration into orgasms, which also then led to explorations into psychedelics and higher forms of consciousness, really came from an experience that I had where I was in a 7-year monogamous relationship, and it was beautiful for as long as it was, and it taught me as much as it needed to. But then I got to a point where I describe it as falling asleep at the wheel of my own life, where for 2 years, I barely remember what happened to me. Everything was kind of just like a gray color. I didn't feel creative. I didn't feel sexual. I lost touch with a part of myself. But from the outside, it would have seemed like I was doing exactly what I was supposed to do. I had graduated from broadcasting school and got hired into a major network, CTV Vancouver, as an on-air personality. I was in this beautiful relationship. I was living in Vancouver, the city of my dreams, right by the water in the West End, and nothing seemed wrong, but I was so fundamentally unhappy. And I kind of swept my hand across the table of my life in one fell swoop and let it all go. I burned it all down, and I realized that I had to leave if I wanted to figure out who I was and what was important to me. And the thing that lit the match was an orgasm. I ended my relationship, and I first of all, I saw this person from across a room, and my body reacted. It said, "You can't go the rest of your life not knowing what it feels like to sleep with that person." I was like, whoa, 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 Nicolle. Like, you don't, where did that come from? It was like this other part of me, this like entity that said that, and I had to like reel this thing in and like try to lock it back in a box, but the box had been opened. This thing inside of me wanted to be let out, and it was tired of being silent, and I couldn't help but listen to it, and so many people don't, and I could have continued to be numb, and I could have not succumbed to this, because it took a lot of hard work and a lot of pain, but I did, and I ended up having sex with this person, and it was transcendent. I had the type of orgasm that took me out of my body, and I hadn't done mushrooms yet at that point, but I would equate it to a profound mushroom experience. And while I was experiencing these transcendent orgasms, I found the idea for the orgasm book. It was like I reached into this place beyond thought and it downloaded into my brain. And when I floated back down into my body, it was there. I saw the whole thing and it was clear to me. And I think creative ideas are for everybody. You know, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it. I know it doesn't favor anybody. It's just, are you willing to receive the message? And I was willing to receive the message. And it's my responsibility now to spread that message as far as I possibly can. And so it was through the experience of orgasm that I was able to go on this new creative journey, which has opened up completely other paths for me. One of them being psychedelics, in that when I experienced this other state of consciousness, I started to ask, in what other ways can I experience that? And what messages are waiting for me on the other side of my rational thinking survival brain and some of my biases, such as my upbringing, which I do talk about quite a bit. But I think it's just important for anybody listening that they know this about me, because it also really plays into my desire to create a world with more pleasure and less shame. But a lot of my sexuality was tied up in being ashamed. I had a very violent mother. I grew up in a very violent household, and I looked at her one day while she was in a yelling fit, and she almost moved in slow motion. And I thought to myself, if I do everything the opposite of you, I'll be happy. And to me, that meant, not doing drugs, graduating, finding a path that I loved, finding a person that I loved, and not sleeping with more than 10 people in my entire life, which was an arbitrary number. But that number to me represented trying to have some sense of control of my inner world when my outer world was completely steeped in chaos. So sorry. Yes, I can ramble about things as much as you want. I'm, again, big talker. So
it makes my job a whole lot easier. So I'm very happy to have you ramble. One of the, pretty simple questions that pop into my head when you were talking about this transcendent orgasm that you had, not with your partner at the time, correct?
No. So I left my 7-year relationship,
right,
and then ended up having sex with this other person, and they were one stop in my journey, and I knew I had to continue.
Yeah, and so the sex with that 7-year relationship, how would you equate it? Was it a good sex life? Were you having orgasms? This is kind of the simple question that comes to mind. It's like, was it that bad with him that then you found someone else and it was amazing? And that kind of led you to it? Or was it more of a, good sex life and then it was incredible?
Well, I think this is a fantastic question. Thank you for asking it. And I think there's a lot to unpack in even the way that question is asked. So I am so fascinated by the reason why a question needs to be asked almost as much as I am by the answers given.
Yeah.
So listening to you ask that question, I'm like, okay, well, first of all, part of my philosophy is that there is no good or bad, there just is. And that, of course, comes from existentialism, which is, again, this whole idea that all of life is absurd or all of life is meaningless unless you give it meaning. We talk about this a lot in psychedelic communities, that there are no bad trips, there's positive and necessary.
Right.
So this all kind of plays into my mind. So when you say, well, was it good sex or bad sex? I automatically go, it was the sex I needed at the time to get to the place where I was ready to receive whatever the next message was. And it's up to me whether or not I was listening.
Yeah.
So when I met this person who ended up being my 7-year monogamous partner, I was in a place where I asked for a grounding person in my life who was willing to be my best friend and take the time to really help me become more intimate. And he did all of that. Mm-hmm. And then we got to the end, and the inevitable end of something is scary. And I know it's so cliche to say, but the end is the beginning of something new. But it's true. Like, had I not been brave enough to hurt somebody that I loved, I would also be holding them hostage and not be setting them free to then go discover themselves as well. And anything that causes me fear, I usually look at an opportunity to actually break free. So our sex was great. It was exactly what I needed for as long as I needed it. And then it was no longer serving both of us to be in relationship with one another. And sometimes, I'm learning this, you have the burden of being the messenger. And I've been on both sides of that. I've been both the messenger with the burden to pass on that message and do the hard work and make the tough decisions. And I've also been the recipient of somebody telling me something that I didn't necessarily like, and accepting that gracefully, or as gracefully as I could, knowing that if they were being their authentic selves, then they were actually giving me a chance to be my authentic self too. I just didn't know it yet because I wasn't on the path. I was just starting.
Right. And so that experience, it more so just speaks to who you were at the time and where you were at in your life. That's the more important thing than whether it was good or bad, to put it in those terms.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly where I was in my life. And then and that's why I think I was so caught off guard when this voice came inside my head when I saw this other person that almost felt like it wasn't me.
Yeah.
But if you want to get into that, time is layered and not linear, then maybe it was me whispering back. I have this crazy idea that our inner voice is our future selves whispering back to us. So maybe it was me being like, Nicolle, everything's going to be okay. Go have sex with the new person.
Before we get too much into the specifics of the monogamy versus non-monogamy, I would like to just unpack a bit more about your philosophies. And is the broad scope, like you say, about a life with more pleasure and less shame, right? That's kind of, would that be your main philosophy?
I would say that would be my main philosophy because I think that idea permeates so many other things in that it's not just, I'm not talking about sex. I'm not saying that you should have more sex. I'm saying that you should have a more pleasure-filled life, which I believe comes down to something like erotic intelligence, which is expanding the scope of what constitutes sex and therefore pleasure, and becoming more conditioned to feel pleasure rather than turn away from it as something that's an indicator of excess, or that, how would I put this? Maybe we'll just leave it at that. Maybe we'll have a conversation about it, because I don't feel like this is something that I'm supposed to just kind of like spew out. I feel like this is something I'm supposed to unpack with you as a conversation.
So when you say expanding your views on sex and what sex is, what are some non-traditional, not types of sex, but views that you have of what sex can be, or what it should be to each person, rather than just intercourse, and that's sex?
Yeah. I think energetically, when I allow myself to feel sexual, the whole world takes on more vibrant colors. I'm more interested in conversations that I'm having. I feel alive. I feel more connected, and it has nothing to do with sex. It's not leading to something. It's just being in tune with all of life. For me, eroticism is just the gratitude for being alive, and the like constant appreciation and recognition that you are this living thing surrounded by other living, breathing things. And I always kind of laugh about my infatuation with, doorknobs, or, the tops of staircases, the stair railings, when you like run your hand up it and you just kind of like cup your hand around the top. That is not necessarily a sexual thing.
Right.
But allowing myself to fully feel my hand moving across a surface for some reason makes me feel alive. And I love looking at seemingly mundane things and seeing how they could also be incredibly erotic. So, for instance, I have a sub, which means a submissive. I have somebody who basically listens and adheres to the things that I say to help them get closer to their true selves within a context that they don't feel like they can express themselves or explore in any other areas of their life. So this person I sent on an erotic scavenger hunt around Toronto, where I sent them grocery shopping. And I know that sounds so lame, but it's like, I said, go grocery shopping and only touch things that kind of feel phallic to you, or like sexual. And as soon as you kind of put that in your mind, you're like, all right, I'm free to feel what brings me kind of this erotic feeling. What makes me feel good? all of a sudden, you know, the typical things, they're going and they're touching peaches, they're touching bananas, they're looking at like the eggplants, they're kind of laughing, they're running their hands against things, they're moving their shopping cart and just like feeling the rumble beneath their hands. It's like everything can be a form of erotic expression if you allow it to be. And you realize in that moment when you become more expansive that you feel more creative, you feel more alive. And then you see how much we're actually repressed from those feelings.
Yeah, and so I guess it kind of speaks to something like bringing sex and sexuality out of the bedroom, bringing it into the real world where you can experience it at any time of any day. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's like there's a reason why I say the philosophy in two parts. It's not just creating a world of more pleasure, but it's also creating a world with less shame, right? Because I think that shame and pain are two of the biggest barriers to experiencing pleasure. And I talk a little bit more about shame, especially in the orgasm book. I called something the shaming place, you know, where I list off all of these different ways that we are kind of insidiously shamed throughout our lives. Even something like, you know, asking a woman's age and how has she not had children yet, or talking about body hair or body odor, or someone shaming you because it's what their parents did, or shaming you because they're actually afraid of something, right? A lot of the time, shame is the same as fear. It's like, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of losing control over? And for me, it was the fear that if I allowed myself to be fully expressed as a young woman in exploring my sexuality, I would lose all control. Who knows what would happen? So I put it in a box, and only in the last few years have I allowed that person to fully come out, and I've never felt more alive.
One thing I wanted to talk about that you brought up about the hand railing and feeling the top or the doorknobs or whatever. Do you think, is this something that has been opened up to you or that you've learned through experience with psychedelics? Because that's a big part of being on a trip is feeling all these sensations and everything in a new way that feels so beautiful. And is that something that comes with you outside of the trip when the trip's finished and you remember these experiences and what it feels like, and it helps you to be a bit more mindful maybe in those situations?
Yes, absolutely. And I interviewed a psychologist from York named Alex Belser, and he talks about this as well. We had a really good conversation about psychedelics kind of being this bridge. And the thing about bridges are kind of funny in that, one, you can come back and forth across a bridge. But the second part of a bridge is it shows you the distance that still needs to be traveled. And that's how I feel about psychedelic trips, where it's you go to these worlds and you feel the expansiveness of love and how love has no barriers. You experience wonder as if you're a child again. You know, looking at your hands during a psychedelic trip. I know that's like the cliche thing, but looking down at your hands and realizing like these are your hands. These things are beautiful. They're amazing. Look what they can do.
I got to give a quick
nature.
Simpsons reference where I guess it would be like looking at your fingers and for the first time you see them fing.
Yes, that is perfect, and that is exactly what it is. And everything is finging, and it's like you look around and you just experience, you just feel, and you're so present in that. You're astounded by the beauty of being alive. And then you come back into a world, you cross that bridge, and you're able to cross it, but you see the distance. And you see the difference between this world and that one. And so that's why I think integration is so important, and mindful psychedelic trips are so important, not just the way that you go into it, but the way that you come out of it and the way that you integrate it into your life and how you allow it to change you is really important. So yes, like I felt this way about the world around me after an orgasmic trip, but psychedelics have also given me tools to see the world in this way in my regular everyday life. But part of that is again, erotic intelligence. So like the constant awareness of being alive.
Yeah, totally. It's that's a beautiful way to talk about it. And especially I love your analogy with the handrails and the top of the or the doorknobs or whatever. It's cool to think about, and it's
I
something.
guarantee you'll never open a door the same, and whenever you see a handrail, my friend, you run your hand up that. That's what it's made for.
Yeah, except now there's not so many actual doorknobs. They all seem to be like more of a lever, or
That's true.
you know. So yeah, I've got to find a couple good doorknobs and think about it. It's so I don't have experience on a psychedelic trip. It's something I've been very interested in the last few years, and it's something I've been trying to practice more so through a bit of meditation and just practicing mindfulness myself and getting out in nature and stopping and staring at a tree for a while, some kind of things like this. Because I think there are a lot of different ways that you can get to that point, like you said, through orgasm, or through meditation, through breath work, and through psychedelics seems to be one of the most powerful ways. So it's definitely something I've been trying, and I really appreciate having you on to talk about this kind of stuff. And I would like to move on a bit and talk about your views on monogamy and non-monogamy. I've been practicing saying that word because when I put the non in front of it, it makes me stumble every time. Non-monogamy, but I think I got it.
Well, I can help you put another word in front of it,
Sure.
which will make it actually even more accurate and easier to say, which is ethical non-monogamy.
That's right, and that's the way you explained it to me. So maybe we start there, and you can talk about the ethics behind a non-monogamous relationship and what that means.
Wow. Okay. So I think, again, expert of my own experiences, backed by constantly looking and asking people who are farther along in their journey than I am to help enlighten me. But I feel in a way that this lifestyle of being in an ethically non-monogamous relationship was always something I wanted, but it's hard to find information about it, and it's not what's embedded into our upbringing as like a thing that's possible. So how do you figure out what it is that you want, that you think you know what you want, and then how to get the thing that you think you want without 100% knowing that it's what you want because you've experienced it or you're told that it's okay. So
Right.
it's a clusterfuck. It's like, where do you even begin? And I'm really glad that these conversations are starting to kind of, I guess, come into the mainstream a bit. And I do think that psychedelics have played a role in that, because when you go to that other world and you experience an abundance of love, that fear that there's only enough love for you to give one person or only enough love for you to receive is dissipated. And especially with MDMA, there's MDMA that has been used in couples therapy. It brings down, or the way that I've described it, it softens the sharp edges of truth. And I think that's one of the hardest things to confront sometimes in relationships, which is like, what's not working? And MDMA helps with that. So quickly, an anecdote on that. There's an incredible psychologist here in Toronto, and she runs a practice called Remedy. And I interviewed her about the use of MDMA during couples therapy. And I asked her, what's the biggest difference between a session that has it and a session that doesn't? She says in both sessions, the couples chairs are side by side. But in the session where they use MDMA, they reach out and they hold hands. And I just thought that was a beautiful, succinct way to put it. And so I think that psychedelics play a role in the reason why ethical non-monogamy or expansive love is starting to kind of come into the mainstream dialogue, because we're starting to understand that it's possible. Right. And my own personal experiences, I am on an incredible journey of learning. And just recently, actually, I had to reinstate some boundaries within myself that I felt were being compromised. And the way that I look at boundaries is this. When I'm feeling resistant towards something, such as seeing my partner with another person or seeing my partner attracted to somebody else, I have to ask myself, am I feeling resistant towards this because this is a boundary of mine that is being pushed up against? Or am I feeling resistant towards this because I want to be in control of how someone is allowed to make me feel? But it's up to me how I feel. It's up to me how I process that. I cannot control another person. Now, can I still say what makes me feel comfortable or uncomfortable? Absolutely. But letting go of this need to control another person has been such a huge part of my journey in being in, again, an ethically non-monogamous relationship or being in an open relationship. I was on a Bumble panel recently and someone's asked, is open relationship a way for a man to take advantage of a woman? And I'll say it here as well. You put a type of person in any kind of situation where they don't know themselves and they're using an open relationship as an excuse to not vocalize what they need or want, they're going to hurt a person no matter what kind of relationship they're in, whether they go into a monogamous relationship and cheat or go into an open relationship. And I don't say ethical non-monogamy in that case because that's not adhering to the standards. They're still going to hurt that person. So for me, what I mean with ethical non-monogamy is that it's the consent of both people to be in that situation together. And it takes explicit honesty and open communication and sometimes and oftentimes having difficult conversations because you are rewiring a lot of things that we're told about how relationships are supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. I've seen these relationships through friends or friends of friends. And first point, I think it is very important to get this kind of information out there, to have these conversations about the ethics behind it and how it, has the best chance of working to be a healthy relationship. Because I think from my point of view, what I saw a couple of times anyways were the couple in the non-monogamous relationship and a guy who had a girlfriend or another partner, and I believe that other partner was not privy to a lot of information about how a non-monogamous relationship should work, and so I seen a few girls get hurt by that, I believe, and that's some of that responsibility should fall on the guy. I don't know how to put it, but also just that the information isn't out there, and so I think people are entering into these relationships, without the right tools to make it healthy. And I think there are some people out there, men or women, who, like you were saying, do take advantage of the situation, and it's and that's why, because it's happening anyway. Like a lot of different types of relationships are happening, and we need to help. If this is the way people want to live, we want to help them live their best life, to use another cliche. Do you see where I'm coming from?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important to also say that an open relationship is not, again, if it's a consensual thing, it's incredibly empowering for women as well. And I find that a little rut that's easy to fall into when discussing these things is almost victimizing women as if it's inherent that they're being taken advantage of. And that's not true. And again, in keeping in mind that there are many iterations of relationships and that there are people that are undergoing trauma or that are in a relationship where they don't feel like they can get out or express themselves accurately, like for whatever reason, whether it's psychological domination or physical violence that they're experiencing, like those are different things. Mm-hmm. What we're talking about, and I think just to stay on track, is people that are in open relationships that aren't necessarily doing the important work to communicate with all parties involved.
Right.
And so there's terms in polyamorous relationships primarily, where poly being like multiple loves, right? Loving multiple people. That's also different than an ethical non-monogamous relationship. It's like an open relationship. In a polyamorous relationship, mostly what that means is you go out and you actually form other deep, intimate bonds with other people. So it's almost like you have two boyfriends or two girlfriends. You can have like a primary partner, like a live-in partner, or sometimes it's referred to as a nesting partner. And then you can have somebody else that you are also having an intimate, deep, emotional connection with and sexual connection with elsewhere. Mm-hmm. Sometimes those people live together, sometimes they don't, whatever. I don't have a lot of experience with that yet, because that's not necessarily where I'm at in my journey. I'm in an open relationship where my partner and I have subs. So we have people that are able to provide us with something that we don't necessarily want to or are able to provide for each other. We can go out and we can have dates with other people and we can have emotional connections with other people, but we're not necessarily going to like be in relationship with them. Right. But whenever we go out and meet people, we always tell them, this is the situation that I'm in. This is the situation I'm in with my partner. This is where we're at. This is where, like, are you comfortable with those parameters and like fitting into those boundaries within our relationship? And most of the time people are very happy. They're just happy that someone was completely transparent with them, that they don't have to worry that they're going to necessarily get hurt or impose on anything, or that they don't know what's going on. Because if you're just clear, and I know that it's like, how could communication really just be the thing? But to communicate effectively, think about where that core is. Think about where that has to come from. You have to know yourself so well that you're able to allow your reality and someone else's to sync up so well that there's no discrepancy, or at least it mitigates the possibility of someone actually getting hurt from a miscommunication.
Right.
Miscommunication to me is a misstep in integrity.
And so is it something you and your partner would kind of look for is someone who you say you're having this conversation with and you're thinking critically about whether they are in kind of a similar place in life to you, where they've had these, not necessarily the experiences, but they've done some work on themselves. And so they are ready for something of this type. Do you know what I mean? Because I feel like it could fall into that almost a category where it's, a friends with benefits thing. It's been talked about, but then someone falls in love and then they get hurt because maybe they weren't actually at that same place, or maybe they had a hidden agenda where, maybe somebody wanted to find to enter into this type of relationship with you, but maybe to pull you away from your partner. And you know what I mean?
I mean, we could, this is the really interesting thing, right? Yeah. When you allow yourself to go beyond the let me call them the gates of monogamy. And I don't mean that in a negative way. There are incredible lessons that can be learned from monogamy in the same way there are incredible moral lessons that can be learned from the Bible without needing to, believe in God and adhere to everything that Christianity as a lifestyle stands for. It's the same thing. There's so many things you can learn from monogamy that can apply to ethical non-monogamy. So when I say beyond the gates of monogamy, what I'm saying though is there's so many iterations for how this can go. There's so many, but what if this person feels this way but it's something that I want to touch on, which was you said, which was that what if that person falls in love? Why is that wrong? Like, if that person experiences love, they should be able to experience that, because this abundance of love is what this whole lifestyle is about. Right. Now, when you say, well, what if they fall in love? If there's something wrong with that, it probably means that there's been a breach of communication. At the same time, if there hasn't been and that person loves, be there for them on that journey. Allow them to experience love. That doesn't mean that you have to feel bad or responsible for that. If you were clear in what your boundaries were and they fell in love, they're feeling something, and that might be really important for them. And it can be important for you without there needing to be pain or chaos.
Yeah, I think, and I know for sure, my mind is still trapped in the monogamous way of thinking and how people probably will feel or act. And there's, it's a new thing to me, and I hope I'm not coming across.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Why have you chosen monogamy? Because it's a choice. Why have you chosen it?
It's a good question, which I don't think I've ever thought about. So, the first thing that comes to my mind is family. And so I guess in a sense of what family has been taught to us, or what has been taught to us that a family is, with, a mom and a dad and children, kind of that nuclear family. So I would think that would be the main reason I chose monogamy, is because I've always wanted a family with kids and loving parents. Yeah, I guess that's my answer.
Okay. I'm thank you for sharing that.
Okay. Good.
I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah, totally. And thanks. I respect that. I think what I was trying to say is I hope I don't come across as trying to cure anything here, because that would be the last thing I want to do. It's honest ignorance on my part, and just wonder and wondering how these relationships do work, and kind of what precautions or ethics are put into place to make sure they do work. Because I do like to feel like I have a very open mind, and I do want everyone to be happy, and whatever that means, whether it's gay, straight, bisexual, monogamous, non-monogamous. I do believe there's a lot of different types of love, and it's just coming to a time where all these conversations are starting. Having said that, what do you see recently over the past 10 years in this kind of, in this area of relationships? How has it progressed? Where are we now? Where were we 5 years ago? Where do you see it heading? Are we getting to a good place that it's becoming a bit more open, so these relationships have a bit more of a chance of working?
Yeah, I'm picking up a book right now. I'm just kind of flipping through a few pages. This book is called The Ethical Slut, and it's on its third edition, and it talks about polyamory and ethical non-monogamy, and it's honestly served truly as a guiding light and a Bible of sorts, to help me through some of the things that I've experienced on my own journey, such as jealousy, or, what do you do when your partner is out on a date? What do you do when you want to talk about having a family? What does that actually mean? It talks a lot about family dynamics. It talks about trauma survivors. This book has always been a popular book. I don't know when it was published, but it's on its third edition. I believe it was maybe even been in 1990 that it came out. But I think the ways that people have felt is not new.
Right.
I think the ability to express it without repercussion from a societal standpoint is what's allowing more people to just come out. But it's not like they weren't always there. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm learning. Because the more resources I look for, and again, like I'm only 2 years into this journey of my personal sexual awakening, which includes being in an open relationship for the past year. The groups that I found myself in, and the community and the friendships that I've formed, are people that are way more versed in this than I am, and they've been doing this for a lot longer. One of the people I interviewed is actually writing a book right now about kind of the code of ethics of polyamory. He's been doing this for 20 years. And really the only difference is that people are more receptive to talking about it.
Yeah. And yeah, that's of course a good thing. So can we chat a bit about, what you would see, if any, differences leading into a marriage and the possibility of having kids and parenting? Is there much change in the relationships you would have once marriage comes into it? Is marriage important to you? And what if yourself or someone else was bringing kids into the world in a relationship? Are there any differences between how you're conducting your relationships now and what they would look like in those situations?
So my first counter question to myself, or, to the group, is, what is marriage? What does marriage represent? So in a monogamous sense, marriage represents the holy communion between two people in the eyes of the government, the eyes of God, and a woman taking on a man's last name, melding families, basically saying that, like, I declare that I'm yours and you are mine, and there will be like massive financial burden if we decide that this is no longer true. On the other side, it also represents the declaration of undying love. I have that with my partner right now. And again, this is not saying there's anything wrong with monogamy and whatever, but I choose that every day without being told that I have to choose it every day. If it comes to a family, what, if ever, is an abundance of love in a household? How is it ever going to have a negative effect on a child? How is being loved and exposed to more love ever going to have a negative effect on raising children? I grew up in a household where I had a mom and a dad, and they went through a messy divorce, and it was terrible, and there was tension in my house, and it wasn't positive, let's say. It was necessary for my growth as a person, but it wasn't necessarily positive.
Right.
I would take 3 people in a household who loved each other more than I would take 2 people that didn't. At the same time, that's not to say every marriage goes sideways. So let's say there's 2 people in a household that love each other and 3 people in a household that love each other, and they're all loving this child. I fail to see how that would be an issue.
Yeah, and I won't speak to that. I would guess that's something more that we would chat with child psychologist about, possibly, or whatever, what the differences are there. I would think, so in terms of when you're at that place, would you be more careful in vetting your partners, in obviously open communication being the key again, that, you know, hey, I've got kids, and if you're going to be in this relationship, you need to be a father or a mother, or is it something you would keep outside of the parenting roles?
And maybe like maybe they're like Aunt Susan or Uncle Joe for a bit. You know, maybe it's, I think that's at the discrepancy of any parent in any situation as to when they believe it's appropriate to introduce any kind of idea to their child.
Right.
Relational, sexual, socially, whatever. And again, I think interviewing a child psychologist on the implications of, you know, a household with 2 parents versus a household with anything more than 2, which would be considered non-traditional. Like, right. What does that actually mean? I don't even remember your question.
It was more so, do you think your relationship would change once marriage or children was brought into the picture?
Yes, naturally.
Yeah.
And the only thing I would say to that is, wouldn't your relationships with most things change if you're thinking of having children or thinking of bringing someone to the house if you already have kids? You know, like that natural tendency once new life is introduced or something is being introduced to somebody you care about. I think we always do that, whether it's inviting someone new into a friend group to inviting them home to meet our kids. I think it's just this. It's the same thing. Again, is this person bringing more love into this child's world, or are they not necessarily somebody that's at that level where you're trying to have a relationship dynamic with them that's more profound than maybe just something familiar outside of the relationship?
Right. And one of the thoughts that popped into my head when I was thinking about this question or whatever is about it taking a village to raise a child, in a more traditional sense, where it used to be, you know, small communities and villages all working together to help each family out and to help raise all the children, not just their own. And I think there's something to be said that seemed to be such a great way of life in gathering help from multiple families, multiple parents, and you know, I think that would make sense in the terms of, you know, hey, having more parents it probably can't be a bad thing if they're good parents. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And especially because as much as we don't really want to admit this is true and we are trying to change it, the burden of parenthood lies largely on the mother. I say burden not as a bad thing. It's not synonymous with being bad, but I'm saying you are carrying the load of a life, you know? And so we don't necessarily have systems in place that support women. We also have women that are not giving up their careers to be mothers, or if they are, that's a choice now that they can make. Still, to me, when I think about my ideal life, and what's really interesting too about my journey is that the life I want for myself and that I imagine, I'm actually not emotionally there yet and ready to accept it. Right. So when I say I'm on my journey, I literally mean I know what I want things to look like, but I'm incrementally getting there. And so I know that I want to raise children in a family that comprises of more than just me and a man. Now, knowing that, how do I get there? Well, I'm on that journey. I'm on that path, and I need to I have little checkpoints where I have to check in with myself, and my partner and I are, again, not at the place in our relationship where I feel comfortable us going outside the relationship and creating like truly emotionally in-depth relationships with other people that don't involve both of us. Right now we're experimenting with, you know, kind of bringing someone in and what that might look like to have a 3-way relationship with both of us and another person. And that's about as far as I'm willing and able to go right now. So when I get to the point where what I want and what I'm capable of align, I think that's kind of part of becoming myself, becoming more myself.
Yeah, it's all got to be, you know, it's tough, I'm sure, it's tough to ask and answer and assume anything when, like you say, it's an evolving journey that you don't know what it's going to be like when you get here. You have an idea of what you'd like, but it's a journey. Who knows? Like you said, 10 years ago, this would not have probably been on your radar.
No, I don't think so. And the other part of it is like, you never really arrive, right? When you allow yourself to, again, go on beyond the gates of monogamy, the feeling of like, I say settling, not in a bad way. Again, I mean settling in the true sense of like arriving at a place and now just being there. You found your person, you get the house, you get the kids, you do the thing. There's always going to be things happening within that, but you've arrived somewhere. When you go beyond that, you're constantly in a state of experimentation, evaluation, challenges, discussions, which is why it's so important to talk, because you are figuring it out as you go. And this ideal that I have in my mind, that's why I refer to these checkpoints that I'm constantly hitting, because that's really all I have. I don't have a blueprint for how this relationship, because it's tailored to me at any given time and my partner at any given time, I don't know exactly what comes next. And you have to be comfortable with the unknown. But the more you throw yourself into the unknown, the more you learn and the more you grow.
Let's talk about one of your newest projects, I think, right? The Men Who Take Baths.
I started it in 2017. Yeah.
Okay. And so, well, how about you explain what it is? You'll do a better job than I will.
All right. Men Who Take Baths is a initiative where I put men in bubble baths and I interview them about what it means to be a man. I then host an art show, a panel and group discussion. I interview somebody from the audience live in the bath. And we are in the process of turning it into a podcast. And then, you know, in the before COVID, we were planning a cross-Canada tour to try to hit every major Canadian city and host bathtub events. So that's kind of the whole, like, you know, that's the whole thing. I can also get into like why I did it, but you guide me in whatever direction you want me to go.
So I believe the main question in these you're looking to answer is what it means to be a man. Is that correct?
Yeah. So what it means to be a man is one of the questions that I ask. And the reason why the project kind of hinges on that question is actually from this idea from one of my favorite feminist writer philosophers, Camille Paglia, which she kind of talks about this idea of to free women, we must free men. And what she means by that, or at least my interpretation of it, and what I've kind of used to meld the direction of this project, is that if women want to be free to express themselves fully, they need to not be looked at as the other in relation to man. But when man is shown that women are just the weaker qualities of being a man, such as don't be a pussy, don't show emotions, vulnerability is a weakness, you also put men not only in a box that they can't break out of to discover the complexities of themselves, but you also have them constantly pushing up against women and seeing women as the other or as less than, which actually keeps women in shackles from being seen as true autonomous beings as well in their own individuality and regard. So to allow men to explore themselves and see themselves, you also allow them to free women from the classification as less than or the other in relation to.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty, that's awesome. So what are some, if you can give us a bit of a preview of what we could look forward to or find in these interviews, what are some of the answers that stick out most to you that you remember when asking guys, what does it mean to be a man?
I'll share a quick story with you, which was the first time I ever did this. I reached out to men in my immediate circle who I loved and trusted and who I thought just were fantastic, standout, noble citizens. And the reason I did this is because it was right after Me Too. And I had a lot of women in my life asking, where are the good men? And a lot of those good men didn't know how to speak up and be part of the conversation. And I was afraid that we might altogether lose the ability to talk to one another out of fear of saying the wrong thing, that we never actually made progress. Because I'm a huge advocate for compassionate disagreement. I think that when we disagree on something, it actually shows us exactly where it is that there's a miscommunication, and that's where work needs to be done. If we don't talk, we never figure that out. If we try to only impress each other by saying the right thing, we never figure out where we're actually in danger of miscommunicating. So I reached out to these men. I asked them to be part of it. They all said yes. And only after I'd interviewed all 15 of them and transcribed the interviews did I realize there was one thing they all had in common, which I could have never predicted ahead of time. And that was that they all grew up without a father.
Really?
And that hit really hard for me. Because I was like, that's not the kind of world we want. We don't want the kind of world where in order to create men that respect women or view women as equal, you have to actually remove the father figure. What does that mean? How do we raise boys into men who view women as equal as a society, and asking these men, like, what are you doing now in your life to help move that forward? And so that was just something that I think was important to note. In terms of what it means to be a man, I hear, actually, again, I love talking to trans people. I really do. And one of my favorite writers, Simone de Beauvoir, believes that trans people are going to be ultimately what helps with the dissolution of gender. We know that gender is a construct in terms of like what you are permitted or not permitted to do based on how you're born. And in this book, The Ethical Slut, it actually says like freeing your sexuality requires that you look at cultural beliefs about what it means to be a person of your gender. So we need to know the box so we know how to break out of it, is basically what I take from that. So what does it mean to be a man is actually fundamentally a question that shows us the parameters of the box. Yeah. And everyone has a different answer. And I'm so fascinated by the way that the trans folk that I've interviewed answer this question, because they've lived half of their lives as women and then transitioned into being men and then were in the bathtub. And you learn a lot about the way that culturally society does treat or corral men or women to be a certain way. So what does it mean to be a man?
If I did not put a lot of thought into the question, but again, if it was coming to me right now, it again would be about family and providing for your family and taking care of your family. That's kind of what comes to mind for me first.
Yeah, I've heard answers about family, about integrity, about being virtuous, I've also heard of a lot of what does it mean to be a man is the opposite of what we're taught being a man is, which is like not showing your feeling. You know, a lot of the men talk about the fact that they don't feel less masculine if they cry about something or feel emotion towards something. I've also heard a lot of men kind of reject the notion of the question itself, saying, well, doesn't asking me what it means to be a man kind of perpetuate the idea that a man has to be a certain thing?
Yeah.
But, you know, if we're going to fall down that philosophical hole, I, again, come back to the idea where you need to know the parameters of your gender to know how to work outside of them and deconstruct them.
Right. Yeah.
So it's an interesting, it's an interesting platform because I really do believe that the medium is the message and that the way in which a message is delivered largely influences and is vital to the way that message is received. So putting men in bathtubs and seeing them in that vulnerable state almost makes what they say have more of an impact and a consideration for those listening. I've had I've heard through the grapevine that some people are like, well, how can she consider herself a feminist if she's only speaking to men? And my rebuttal to that is, I am speaking to women through men. I am asking men to help us by asking them what they need from us to feel like they can help.
So you're being an advocate for women by, I see what you're trying to say for sure.
This is the most feminist project I could possibly do.
Yeah.
You know, if feminism stands for gender equity, which is the fair and equitable treatment of both men and women based on what is needed for their gender, how is putting men in bathtubs and asking them, you know, questions about their complexities and nuances and their lived experiences, which then in turn gives us the opportunity to examine ours, you know, is that not healing the divide? And is healing the divide not one step closer to equality?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really think it's a great project. I haven't got to look into it more so. Where would someone go if they want to read? So it's articles that you've published on your website or blog, or where could we go to see some of these, or are they out yet?
So the website is actually launching very soon.
Great.
The Instagram would be the best place. That's at Men Who Take Baths. And then once the website publishes, there will be all the interviews there from 2 rounds in Vancouver, 1 round in Toronto. We're going to be expanding, like I said, across Canada. There will be a podcast soon, and we have a few videos from some of the last interviews that I did in Vancouver at the end of 2019. So those will be available as well for people to watch. We're definitely going to transition more into video interviews. And then, once COVID lifts and we're all kind of free to explore again, definitely starting to host more events, because I find that in-person conversations are really important. And there's something magical that happens when a man gets into the tub. And it's one of those things that you just really have to be there to witness it. And that's why it's so important to host a live interview.
Cool. That would be something really interesting to see. And you interviewed George Stroumboulopoulos?
Yeah, so he was actually one of my mentors when I was in broadcasting school.
Okay, great.
And I told him about the project, and he changed his travel schedule just to be there, to be in the tub and to support me. So
that's awesome. That must have been, was that one a bit nerve-wracking, or?
I had interviewed him already a few times. So
yeah.
like I had kind of gotten over the whole like interviewing the interviewer. But I really liked having a conversation with him because he would challenge me back on the ways in which I asked the questions. And that was really important. So when I asked him, like, what's your definition of masculinity? He was like, well, what do you mean by masculinity first?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like, why are you at? And that's when I was like, right. The reason why, or the way in which a question is asked, is sometimes as important, if not more important, than the answers given.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that in just recently trying to focus on that myself for this podcast, in what kinds of questions I'm asking and how I should rework them to get better answers, or answers just that open up to more conversation. And yeah, questions are tricky.
Yeah. Well, language is subjective. I mean, it really is, and you know, that's why I love, for the Orgasm book, for instance, why I'm a huge fan of rhymes, or why I think music seems to we get less snagged on music when we're listening to a song or singing along. We're hearing the words, but we're feeling something more. And so I think with any kind of conversation, if you can successfully get somebody to the beginning of a sentence, to the end of a sentence, without them falling down into little potholes of their own subjectivity, like, you've asked a good question.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. One last thing, I think, because this has been awesome. I would like to wrap it up with, and take a minute if you need, some of your best advice from your experience on how to have a healthy sexual relationship and what that would look like.
A sexual relationship with whom?
I get a lot of family monogamous relationship listeners. So do you have advice that would tailor to, let's say, a married couple?
Well, I would say that I can go by a moment in my life that changed my life. And it was one of the simplest things I could have possibly done. I was reading a book called Come As You Are by Emily Nagrowski, I believe. And she said, "You're normal." And reading the words "you're normal" made me cry, because I think it's so important that we're reminded that whatever our sexuality is, how often or how little we feel like having sex, what turns us on, what triggers us, you're normal and you're allowed to feel the way that you feel. But the second most important part of that statement was, not only did she say you're normal, but she said, go look at yourself in the mirror. She said, grab a mirror and go look at your pussy. And I did it because I felt like, for some reason, if I didn't, she would know. And so I went to the mirror and I sat down and I looked at myself, and I started bawling my eyes out, because I realized I hadn't looked at myself lovingly since I was like 15 years old. I hadn't actually acquainted myself with the look of my own vulva since I was young and was just like figuring it out. And I felt like she had a message for me. And you might think that that sounds strange, but I guarantee if you go as a woman and look at yourself in the mirror and just meditate on your own pussy, a message will come to you if you're ready to receive it. And if you're receiving it, it's because you're ready, even if you think you're not. So that would, I can't speak to the men. So yeah. number one, like, well, I guess I can speak to the men. Be there. You are an anchor. Men are the anchors that allow for women to float as far away as they need to go into that universe to collect the messages. And like I said, when I had that transcendent orgasm, when I floated back down to my body, it wasn't just my body that was waiting there for me. It was a man who loved and cared for me deeply that was waiting there for me, who could hold me as I went through these transformative experiences. So I think as men, it's like, be the anchor, not an anchor that holds one back, but that an anchor that reminds one that no matter how far they go, there is a safe place for them.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to put it. Not to hold someone back, because often that's what you could think of an anchor as being, but it's also something to help and be there for. I just want to say thank you one more time for being so open and having such an honest conversation. There's a lot there that I'm going to enjoy going back and listening to and trying to learn from. What's the best place? Do you like sending people to your personal Instagram?
Yeah, I would say my personal Instagram is the best place. That's at Nicolle double L. So that's Nicolle, the word double, and then another L. Hence I have two L's in my name. And that is kind of a portal, I would say, to all of the other things I'm doing, such as Girls Who Say Fuck, which is the publisher of the Orgasm book, and of Men Who Take Baths. So that's kind of all of where you'll be able to find me, the things I do, the people I work with, and just, some of my musings and philosophies of, taking the experiences of my own life and distilling them into projects and conversations that I can have with many people who are also on their journey.
Yeah, that's great. So everybody follow Nicolle and her projects. You can order the Orgasm book online, right?
Yep, at theorgasmbook.com. Yep.
And yeah, thank you one more time for being on here. We'll
Thank you.
hopefully chat in person sometime. You make your way out to Vancouver once in a while.
Yes, I will. We will definitely meet up. It'll be wonderful.
Okay, take care of yourself.